And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Thank you again for joining. Today's date is July 8th, Wednesday, July 8th. And we'll be following along the agenda and meeting notes that I've linked here in the chat. Feel free to add yourselves to the attendees list. As is normal, we have a code of conduct, which these RFC calls are all governed by, and we just hope that we can have good discussions in these calls, as well as on the RFC's repo themselves. And just ask that you please raise your hand if you'd like to talk, and I'll do my best to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to discuss essentially what's on the agenda today. Also of note, I apologize for generating these agendas pretty late. They've been popping up usually the day of, since they're still being essentially generated manually. So I apologize if folks aren't getting enough time before these calls to review essentially the items that are on there. I'm going to try to do a better job going forward next week. So that was just a quick update there that I'd like to potentially folks like Wes, who isn't on this call today, as I know there's been an effort, and Tierney, I think, has also helped in the package JS org. There's a new create agenda script that they've been working on there, and I think is in use in various other teams, which I think we could look at pulling in and using instead of the manual process that I've been taking for these calls. So again, there's a HackMD doc, and I'll link it again for folks that are just joining on. Feel free to add yourselves, and we'll dive into the agenda. Before that, I would like to ask if there's any announcements that folks would like to bring up. If not, I know that we had skipped last week's RFC call due to some holidays and out of office, so hopefully other folks have had some time off as well. We are still mulling over and reviewing some of the feedback we actually got from the OpenJS Collab Summit. We had some great sessions there and sort of did a bit of a retrospective, as we did with the last Collab Summit. And our team still hasn't had time to sort of review a lot of that, but appreciate everybody for joining in and sort of giving feedback in those sessions. Yeah, going forward, I'll just go along this agenda. The first issue we actually have here is issue number 160. So the poll for preference on filtering workspaces. I know this is something Roy was hoping to get some community feedback on. Did you want to quickly maybe give us an update on where that's at and what you're seeing, Roy?
Sure. Yeah, I think it makes sense to still leave this in the agenda. More as a reminder for people to check it out and vote if they haven't done so. But that said, there is no rush to get that RFC ratified, right? It's probably only going to land on a minor version of 7. We're not really aiming the 7.0 release for this command filter. So yes, so please, if you haven't voted yet, go check it out. And yeah, I think we can leave it open to collect more feedback.
Sounds good. And it does look like the majority votes, at least for now, are essentially alternatives to the the few
to the original proposals. Yeah, which is nice. So yeah, I think it's starting to get into a trend. It might end up there. We'll see. It might still change.
Okay, so we'll leave this on for another week or so, and potentially we can surface some of the findings from that discussion then next week, maybe. Awesome. So moving on, RFC 150, add file pack dependency protocol. I'm not sure if I think Roy, you noted we didn't poke David to join the call this week.
Yeah, I did poke him at the very last minute, and unfortunately, he is not available today. So. Okay.
So we can hopefully move this or keep it on the agenda for next week then. And if you want to actually link, I know that you've poked that David a couple times. Maybe can you add a link to the calendar for him? Just the calendar.
Oh yeah, I did that. Open. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Good call.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just easier to follow along. There shouldn't be any changes to the current day time yet, but there might be in the future, and that would be the best place to figure out what's being changed.
Seeing that Isaac just joined, sure. Maybe he has some ideas too, because I remember last time we discussed this RFC, we've seen that Isaac had follow up with the original issue and had some ideas and some feelings on this proposal.
You're talking about the RC 150, the file plus pack dependency protocol?
Yeah.
Sure. I'm not sure, Isaac, if you've had a chance to even look at it yet. But yeah, if you have any insight or comment, I can link the RFC here for you as well.
So sorry, I'm still kind of paging in all of the context after 4 weeks out.
It's still downloading.
Yeah. Yep. But you can definitely wait for the next meeting then we can also ping David.
Yeah, that's fine. We can leave it for next week. Go ahead, John.
Cool. Could I just, on that one, just say, is this what I think it is, a way of, because I'm very concerned about my behind the firewall problems. And is this a way of me installing stuff in so that I don't have to host stuff all over the place and provide environment variables and get it to point all over the place so we can install things? So we can have local copies of stuff in a folder or go to look to first. Because it's a little brief to what why.
This is slightly different.
Okay.
So essentially, okay, yeah, I do recall this. The proposal in a nutshell is, so right now you can list a dependency with a file protocol, right? A file URL. Mm-hmm. And that will tell NPM to create a symlink to that folder path. This is a way to say, I want to specify a folder, but instead of creating a symlink, I want NPM to create a tarball and then unpack that tarball, just like it would for a normal kind of publish and install. And so, changes in that folder won't be reflected immediately until I reinstall. Part of the thing that fell out of the discussion was if you create a symlink to a folder, at install time, it doesn't run the prepare scripts, right? So it doesn't it won't rebuild all of your TypeScript into JavaScript or what have you. So my thought was rather than adding a new protocol that now has to get kind of threaded all the way through the system and is not going to be backwards compatible, what if we just said, I want to run, npm install file blah 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 -- rebuild or something, and that would tell npm go ahead and run all the prepare scripts and relink everything and do all the stuff you would do, but still have it be a symlink. Another option, if that's not, if I'm misreading kind of what the need is or what the use case is, another option would be a flag to say when you encounter a file dependency reference, don't create a symlink, pack the folder and then unpack it. So, still not adding a new protocol, but instead just adding a config option that would say, this is how you handle file protocols. Either of those would actually be somewhat less costly in terms of disruption to the ecosystem than adding a new protocol. And not super hard to do.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. Because I would really love to have that shortcut, right? So useful.
And you can imagine there are situations where in development, I want to create a symlink because I'm working on these things side by side. I want to make sure they work, etc. But when I'm installing in production, maybe I don't want those symlinks there, or when I'm in some different environment in a Docker environment or something, I want to just create that, pack and unpack it. So you can sort of get most of the way there with bundle dependencies and then packing something up for deployment into production. But a lot of folks, the way they deploy into production is they do a git push and then they do a git checkout and then they run npm install locally. So I can imagine that like the flag to pack and unpack might be somewhat useful in some scenarios.
Yeah. Okay. It's probably best to let this mull, I guess, for another week.
Sure.
If we can get David. Also, I think there's a couple things that we should probably change about this, since a lot of it is just referential. It's not sort of self-contained. Based on, what's the actual request here. Because, I mean, rebuild links on install, like is that the suggestion in the RFC versus the actual just the protocol? Like, would we want to do both? They might be separate RFCs, I guess. Yeah, okay. Moving on quickly to if there's an update on RC number 129. I know, again, as Isaac noted, he's been out for a while and had was essentially the champion of this RC. And I know there was a little bit of back and forth with Zoltan of PNPM about just the schema getting a little even more broadening the scope, I guess, for essentially nesting types of depths, so dependencies and optional dependencies. I'm not sure, Isaac, if you remember that discussion. That
adds a whole level of dimensionality. Could somebody drop the link to the meeting notes, please? Sorry about that.
Yep, sorry. I can do that for you right here. And feel free to add yourself. And then I can also send you to exactly what I'm referencing here in terms of, the RC 129 is the overrides schema, which I thought we were pretty much okay with how it looked.
So I think adding an additional layer of nesting to tell the type of overridden dependency is, I don't prefer it. The other thing is, I actually quite liked the idea. I mean, I thought it was rather cute to use the @ sign instead of the dot, because it sort of reads like foo at 2.3.4. The problem with that, or the argument against that, or the argument in favor of using the dot, is that it's the same thing that's used for the exports field and module maps in for ES modules. So it's sort of there's some like semantic precedent there within our ecosystem to use a dot to mean this specific thing.
Right. Were those the two? Those were the two biggest things from the feedback.
Yeah, I mean, mainly I think not to like diminish it. I think it's, we're debating UX, so saying that something is ugly or confusing or hard to read is very relevant. In fact, it's the whole thing we're talking about. But essentially, I think Zoltan was saying that the dot as a object key is kind of off-putting or confusing or weird, just ugly. Didn't like it. And like I said, I mean, I can certainly appreciate that, but also I think it is still probably the best of the available options. The challenge with specifying the type of dependency that's getting overridden is that you might have things where like X overrides Y, but only when it's an optional dependency of X, but then there's something else within X that has a regular dependency on Y. It's like, it's not clear whether it should be overridden or not. And that gets into some pretty sticky territory. Whereas just saying anything down this branch of the dependency graph, regardless of how it's being pulled in, will be overridden.
So is that when you say sticky, it's just from the actual implementation standpoint? Like I understand you'd have to carry around more references to.
Well, so it's yes, and also the like understanding the semantics as a person using the feature gets considerably more sort of weighty.
Right.
Gets more hefty because now there's like multiple different ways that you can override something and then either fail to end up overriding the thing you wanted to, or override something you didn't want to, in a way that might not be obvious at all.
Yeah. Considering who would be using this most often, it's sort of like the use case of overrides, is that well defined here in the actual RFC itself? I'm not sure.
We did go through several use cases where you would want to use it. It's tempting to look at this and say, well, this is a power user feature, so we can make it a little complicated and very explicit, and it's fine because nobody's going to use it who's not, like a super duper expert. And I think that's actually the wrong way to look at this, because what this actually is, yes, it is a power user feature. It's also an escape hatch feature. This is something that's going to be used by somebody who has exhausted a bunch of other options and can't kind of get their needs met in the like approved proper ways. And this is their like, fine, just throw an override in there, just shim it so we can get our test passing or get our thing out.
That's the kind of use case that I'm kind of looking for in the RFC itself, I guess. It's kind of like this seems to be like a last resort for people that can't update or want to ignore even.
You're basically saying like, I want to override the stated dependency requirements of some modules I'm using. One of the most compelling use cases for me is like, I depend on module X. X depends on a vulnerable version of module Y. Now, I know that X will work with the fixed version of module Y, and I know that I could update to a newer version of X, but like I can't do that right now, and I just got to get this alert to stop happening. So I'm just going to say, no, you're getting the new version of Y, right?
Yeah, those are the kinds of use cases I think we should add to these kinds of RFCs, where it's like the actual real world example versus kind of like the lower level, like this is how this functions, like this method, this API will or method functions,
Right.
versus something that's like a little bit more tangible, like that example, let's say example of where you're trying to get yourself out of like a situation where you're kind of stuck and you want or you're doing like local development and you want to be testing something. You can use overrides even. Like this goes back to, right? Like you could be using overrides with like a specific version of something to be doing testing locally, right?
Right. Or
like, so this would even solve for your file pack sort of situation that you were just explaining, right?
Maybe.
Well, like the use case of I want to link something like that's relative during development, and instead of I could use overrides essentially to reference that.
So there are 3 use cases that are, I mean, they're not given as much sort of spill as many bytes on them as maybe I could have, but there are 3 use cases that are listed out under the motivation section up near the top. So we could go into a little bit more detail before landing it, but it's yeah, it's pretty. There are cases where a human knows better than any programmatic dependency resolver. bottom line.
So how close do you think we are then to just landing
Move forward
this?
with it?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't seen any more discussion since my comments back to Zoltan a month ago.
Like,
so I don't know.
Is that not like a feature that could be rolled out if we did see value, let's say, in even filtering further, like that, the dependencies versus optional dependency filtering in overrides, like that could be added potentially in the future, whether or not we think it's valid today or we want to be doing it.
It would not be easy to add, right? Because the nature of the way that this sort of data structure is, it doesn't tell you what kind of dependency it is. It just has a version selector,
right,
as the left-hand side, and then the right-hand, or it has a package specifier or dependency specifier as the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side is either an override object or a string version. So yeah, getting from the proposal to the more elaborate, like, dependency type filtering kind of deal would be a lot harder. But I really struggle to come up with a situation where I want to override this particular thing, but only when it's an optional dependency and not when it's something else. And it's really not obvious what happens if there's a production dependency of an optional dependency, and that's being overridden. If it
so instead of optional, let's consider
cascades.
dev. Let's consider dev dependencies versus dependency.
Right. So okay, I have a dev dependency on A, and A has a proper production dependency on B, and I also have a production dependency on B, and I say that a dev dependency on B should be overridden. Well, nobody has B in their dev dependencies, but I do have kind of two routes to that B module, one of which is dev and one of which is production. And so it's not clear, like, do I need to override that because it's in the dev portion of the tree, and meaning I have to duplicate it? Or because it's a production dependency of something, do I not override it? And it gets more, then if you say, well, I don't override it because it's nobody's dev dependency, okay, what if I don't have a production dependency on B? Now B is a dev dependency functionally because it's a production dependency of a dev dependency. And it's just, it's basically taking something which is a description of a relationship at a single point in the node and abstracting it out to how we select a section of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of this like impedance mismatch in the semantics there. I don't think that that's a good idea to go down that route.
I'm just trying to think of the use, like when I would want to do that.
I mean, you can already, if you wanted to say, like, I only want to override A's dependency on B, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the feature does give you a way to do that. Like, you just create a nested override object with like A and then a curly brace and then B and then the version.
I think the way I see it, the need for like describing other types of dependencies, like optional or dev, would be more useful if this was like something that you could share, like, it could actually be published into a package and like taken into consideration, but we're not opening that Pandora's box. Like, so that say, like, I don't think there's much value in having the type, because it's always going to be your project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I definitely, the nested, the nested overrides is what solves that, like, for me now. Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, if there's not much discussion, like I felt like this was pretty much wrapped up beforehand.
I will land it. It sounds like we're approving it.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this something we would like to have in 7.0, or you're planning it for a minor?
I think we should stop adding new features to 7.0 and try to get the beta out as soon as we can. It can be a 7.1. It's fine.
Sure.
It's not going to be that hard to implement, but it does require some rather rather invasive surgery in Arborist. So it's going to take a bit of time to kind of like make sure we think through that and get it done exactly right. So I think punting it until after the 7.0 release is probably wise.
Awesome. So quickly moving on, number 126. So adding type information to package JSON in the registry. I know Ordo's been jumping in here and also has been updating this RFC for a bit. I think this is on the registry and now in terms of us, if we were to do anything like add a new field to the document or the Corgi docs, we'd have to do a bit of work to those endpoints. And also whether or not this is something we agree upon. I'm not sure if anybody's looked at this in the last month or so. I think, Jordan, you've had some discussion also in the actual TypeScripts. You've given feedback in those issues, I believe.
Can you give me a link so
Yep.
I can page it back in? Sorry.
Yeah, this is the referenced link to the TypeScript discussion that Aura kicked off, and this is the link shared in chat to the actual RFC itself.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, my main thoughts on this is essentially like that I don't want it limited to being a Boolean, and I don't want it limited to being just relative paths. But like beyond that, I don't think it's like in scope for this meeting, right? It's like separate tooling kind of questions. I think that's the extent of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I have to read through this again since it's been updated. I apologize. I haven't had time to look at this. I know Order's not in here, but yeah, I think we probably should punt this to next week again. I would like to move this forward though in some way.
Yeah, I guess what's like the thing that we can do to move it forward?
So actually, we can potentially, I mean, I have to just read through this again before I think like giving like a thumbs up. I think everybody here should probably give a read through, and then potentially if we have consensus or how we can get consensus is kind of up for debate. To land it and then backlog it in the registry sides backlog. There would also be work potentially to backport this to, which we have done in the past. Like if we make updates to a document or Corgi docs, like we have historically run scripts to essentially update and add new fields to old versions of packages. So
to packages or to the CLI?
To the Corgi doc.
To the Corgi doc.
Yeah, it's a bit more involved to go through and add fields to the documents themselves. Mm-hmm. And it has the unfortunate side effect of like invalidating caches and various other things. So if we do that, it's sort of more prudent to do so very slowly, yeah. Right?
Yeah,
so
not
basically
dump 4.5 terabytes on everyone.
Right. So basically, like walk the registry with enough of a timeout between hits that we can expect it'll take a month to go through the whole thing. So it's just sort of slowly trickling out with the new data. Updating Corgi docs is much simpler. And I guess even the pack units, if we're updating those, it's not so bad. It's just, it takes more time because it's more work. But I guess we could do it quickly. It's not
I guess
that
one
bad.
piece of context that I'm missing is what is a Corgi doc?
Sorry, the Corgi doc is the sort of minified, just what you need for installation
Okay,
view of the package document or pacument.
gotcha.
And so the Corgi doc is what Pacoche fetches by default. It's what npm actually uses when it's installing things. Because I don't need to see the README in order to know what your dependencies are, right? I don't need to see the list of maintainers and the description and all that other junk. And it cuts the size over the wire very significantly by like between 50 and 80%.
Gotcha.
Depending on like how much metadata is in there.
So Corgi is a small dog. I think that's where that naming comes from.
Yep.
I would assume so, yes.
Yes. And I think although you say just what you need to install, that's kind of grown. Just what you need to install.
It has. It's what you need for all the things npm does.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, so it does include things like it shows the license and the bin scripts and everything, so that any operation that npm is going to do, it can build the full complete tree with all the metadata it tracks just using the Corgi doc.
So that's where in the Corgi doc, I believe, and I don't know if we have this publicly documented, Isaac, but there's like keys in there for, let's say, has install scripts, which is a change,
right,
or has scripts. And that would be similar to where I was thinking like has types as a Boolean in a Corgi doc would make sense versus the actual full type definitions or type references.
Right. So it has shrink wrap is another one where we just, like, I know that there's a shrink wrap in here. I'm going to have to open up this tarball to see what it is. I'd rather not add a Boolean, right? Because that's just like, it's just a flag that says you have to do more work. If we can short circuit that step and include the type info, if it's small, if it's not like a giant object that most people are not going to benefit from, if it's just a couple of file names most of the time, I think that would be fine to just include in the Corgi doc.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's what essentially would have to be changed and added. So there's a bit of work to get this done and supported. So that's why I think that like I'm not necessarily in a rush to like say that we're. I mean, there's
a bit of work, but most of the work is going to be done by computers. I mean, the the actual like coding work involved is, I would say, on the order of like 2 hours. Like the script, the regen corgis already exists. We just have to kick it off and make sure it doesn't die. I'm
just wondering, do
the bigger thing is like coming to
types.
Yeah, so we have to come to alignment on what the spec is, right? The talking part is the hard part here.
Sure. Yeah, and I would also just be mindful of like privileging types. Then do we start to like privilege transpilers and like other types of things that can be done in the ecosystem, right? Like, so if we add a types information, then can we add like what does this open up? I'm totally okay with doing it since the ecosystem is so large now, the TypeScript and Flow and I don't know. Just putting it out there like anecdotally.
Right.
I say we mull this over for one more week, and ideally poke Orta to circle back, and I'm gonna do my due diligence here and actually follow up in async and just make sure I've wrapped my head around this as well. And yeah, then what we can also do is potentially provide like a next steps. So if this does land, then we can also say this is what you can expect from us to be able to actually land the support. So there might be a certain period of time where we have to backport. It might take, I don't know if it's necessarily a month, Isaac, but I know we've done other things a lot quicker.
Yeah. No, we could. I was overthinking that. We could do it much quicker.
Yeah,
because it's just pack units. It's not tarballs that are being touched.
Exactly. I think it's a couple days. Like it would take maybe 48 hours, maybe.
Yeah, something like
that's my rough estimate. Yeah. Okay. Moving on then to PR and RFC 117. So workspaces running commands. So this is kind of tied to the poll that Roy has up right now, going into detail about the specific commands that we want to queue up and be workspace aware, which would potentially, this would come in sort of a point release after we land NPM 7. Roy, I'm not sure if you have any updates here.
There is one thing actually, yeah. I know last time we discussed this, Jordan suggested adding also an argument in the CLI for providing groups. We were discussing that whole story behind having groups of different workspaces you can work with and having that like behaving like an alias. So yeah, Jordan suggested having also a command line argument for that. So when I was in the process of like documenting that was an action item I had from the previous meeting, I actually saw one of the comments from Daniel from Lerna. And one of the things he actually mentioned in the beginning of that RFC is how bad he actually think his API with -- scope is, like just like trying to learn from past mistakes, right? Like learn from their experience. So that's one thing he actually suggests us not to do. So it was kind of like, it's a tricky situation, like kind of like going back to the point we're trying to avoid. But maybe Jordan wants to speak to it again. Like it seems to be also like quite handy to have the possibility of declaring groups in the CLI. So I just kind of stopped there, kind of asked for feedback, and yeah, that's basically where it stopped last time.
Sure. I'm not sure. I mean, Jordan's been pushing that. I think the filter flag can do enough on its own. I think agree on that, but I'm not sure. This one comment specifically, I'll link it here. It's the one piece of feedback that maybe Jordan, you can speak to.
Maybe he's not there anymore.
It's okay. Yeah, the dash is kind of confusing, like for like personally looking at it and reading it. It's I think, I don't know. You've just pulled that from Lerna. Go ahead, sorry, Timmy.
I was just gonna say, I genuinely like that. It feels very anti-NPM to me. Like it's very different than what I would expect from how I would interact with NPM ever. Like the DX of NPM is, to me at least, has been very different than that, because it feels more like a if like the dash feels more like a flag, which yeah, it's not, or at least it doesn't seem to be. So I mean, I guess in that case it would be if you are providing it as a flag, but it feels like it should be more of a first case or a first pass citizen in the CLI rather than just having it be a flag.
Yeah, it should be a positional argument. I mean, just I use and manage a lot of CLI tools, and it's not unreasonable for a CLI tool to use a -- flag that way. But in NPM, all of the -- flags are config
Yep.
options, which can also live in a config file or in the environment. So yeah, it doesn't, it feels like it should be more of a first class thing.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong, in scripts, defined scripts, we use not -- but maybe triple dash to pass arguments down to the
No, so that we do a double
what's that again?
a double
Double
dash. A double dash says everything after this positional argument is a positional argument, even if it starts with a hyphen.
Right, so that gets a bit confusing, right?
Because the other thing is we don't we are not sort of position dependent with CLI flags
Yep.
that get passed to NPM. So if you do NPM run foo -xyz, it will interpret -xyz as an argument to NPM, as a config value for NPM. So if you want your -xyz to be passed to the foo script, you have to put that double dash there to say, no, this is a positional argument. I know it starts with a hyphen, just ignore it.
Right. So that's where I would be confused as like an end user if we introduce this into like
Yep.
this usage. Yeah.
Right. And like what happens if you set, npm config set workspace group equal workspace filter equals blah, like it gets very confusing.
Okay. So that may be enough to punt that from the proposed. Did you have that in the poll itself, Roy?
Which one?
Like the double dash for.
Yeah, I think it's first or second one, I think.
No, it's not referenced
Yeah,
there.
to filter
No.
filter a subset of workspaces.
No, I mean, yeah, it's like it's the leading option there, actually, the named argument.
Okay.
Sorry, I heard my
Yeah.
name, but wasn't at the iPad. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, we're just talking about the
workspace
RFC.
group. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, workspace group in the CLI option, right? That you suggested last time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I can take a look at that comment.
Yeah, I was just mentioning, like Daniel had mentioned prior, to like try and avoid having the options to set globs.
Yeah, but I never remembered seeing a motive, like a justification for why that should be avoided. Like it was just kind of like we did it in Lerna and I didn't like it, and
Yeah,
I don't want to discard that
No,
likely very usage-based opinion, but like I don't know why.
no, yeah, it was it was a very small comment, just like the prickliness of raw globs in a CLI environment, like when you need to quote them, accidental evaluation, causal intended behavior, etc. He mentioned it as a response to your comment there, but it's like way back in the RFC, like you need to go to the top.
Yeah, so I kind of agree. I have my own reservations about it, which I think are, I mean, I can't speak for how this has been with Lerna, but just in seeing like confusion and user experience and my own kind of running into weird issues with globs in various places, a glob argument really needs to be a positional argument because the shell will expand it in some ways that are sometimes not easy to predict. Or fail to expand it in ways that are not easy to predict. So if you look at like how TAP and NYC have some glob arguments that are config flags, it's really tricky to get right. I think if you have a glob argument as a way to pass in a number of positional arguments, and we're saying, well, any positional argument that has a glob, I'll just go ahead and expand it. Well, that's fine, right? Because then the shell expands it or you expand it, it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. But if you have like workspace group equals core equals core /star, There are going to be cases where what you actually get are multiple different instances of that argument, and so you'll end up with positional arguments that really should have been values for a config flag.
What are those cases? Because like in Bash, at least, right, a star there's only one star and it'll evaluate to the first thing it matches. So yeah, you might get an argument you don't expect if you don't quote it, but then you learn that and you quote it, right? Like even that's the same problem with positional arguments, right? Like if I pass foo/star, it's just going to grab the first thing inside foo unless I quote the pattern.
It'll grab all the things inside foo. So
as like a space separated arguments, or
yeah, what'll happen is if I do like, you know, echo foo/star, you're going to get multiple positional arguments passed to that command. And so this is fine with tap itself because the only thing that uses globs is the positional argument of which test to run, which is fine. Same thing with like remraf or mcderp or whatever. But where it becomes more sticky is when it's an argument to another like config value. So where it's being proposed there is challenging. I can't speak for Lerna specifically, and like there, as you kind of called out, like there's a very like usage-based, experience-based warning flag which has been placed on this particular idea, but I kind of want to know where that's coming from before we put too much weight on it.
So just to paraphrase, it sounds like what you're saying is that specifically using a star in a non-positional argument can be an issue because it can expand to multiple space separated things.
Yeah, I would avoid that.
So it's not, you don't see an issue with a way to quickly target multiple workspaces. You're specifically just talking about this specific hazard that's a real one.
That's one, yeah, I mean, that's one that comes to mind for me.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And that may be what Daniel was talking about. Like that seems likely now that you've explained it. And I do also still want to hear if it's, you know, from him, if it's that or something else. But if it's that and only that, then it seems very important to try and think about what is another thing is there another way to, without requiring someone to go edit a config file, to ergonomically target multiple workspaces as part of running another command that has positional arguments.
Right. So I think there's, this design challenge is a design challenge, but it's not an insurmountable one.
Okay. I mean, like, and I'm only just acting from from my usage experience when I've had workspaces, which is not many projects. Like, I certainly do want to configure aliases for multiples, right? Like that is useful because then I can enshrine it for other developers. But locally, I very often want to, on the fly once and quickly, target multiple groups. And if like it would be a real pain in the butt if I had to either spell them all out or go to a config file to put in a glob or spell them all out. So that's like my motivation for trying to solve the design challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I have some ideas about this that I think I can add some commentary async about this as well. But I just want to be mindful of time as well. We only have about 7 minutes left. And we have at least 2 items that I would like to speak to. So based on the fact that the poll's still open, also that's associated with this, it's probably going to stay open for another week or so. And let's see if we can get Daniel and Dora Zoltan on the next call, which would be really helpful if we can get those folks or even folks from Yarn as well, even to potentially weigh in. Any last comments on that? No?
Okay.
Okay. So moving on to the last RFC that we had on this agenda for this week. So NPM audit resolve number 18. I'm not sure if we've got any movement on this, or essentially we're going to have to reach
we
back
actually
out.
did got something. We actually got another implementation on the CLI repo.
Okay. So sorry, we have another RFC that's been opened. Sorry.
No, an actual pull request, which is I just browsed through it quickly. I think Isaac provided the feedback to the author of that PR, but it seemed really nice how simple, how much they simplified the implementation, like to just the core of the idea, right? But I mean, I think it's definitely something that can be referred to when we follow up with this RFC.
Sure. Is that the add acknowledged issues list to NPM audit?
Yep.
So PR number 1494. Okay, I linked it there in chat for other folks that want to follow along. And I see that their proposal is acknowledged issues is the flag that they want to provide with that's pretty nice.
I mean, it seems like the same use case though. The idea is essentially, here is, I want to be able to say these audit warnings, like, do not apply to me, shut up about them.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
Like, and any mechanism that lets me shut up certain audit warnings, I think solves most people's use case in this thing. And the like correct in my opinion, and bike shed comment like about the spelling of it that Isaac made, right? Like I agree with Isaac's comment here, but like that's, I think, an implementation detail. Like, spell it however we want. Just give me a way to shut up the audit warnings, right?
The bigger thing is I don't want to implement it twice, and
right.
The audit has been like completely refactored, not just refactored, but like fully rewritten to be much more comprehensive and much better at fixing errors, and it all happens client side rather than being server side, which actually it turns out is going to be a huge win in terms of the amount of work and the way that it handles like private dependencies. So there are certain things where we're probably overly cautious in terms of what we redact when we send the package tree metadata up to the audit server. But what ends up happening then is if you have a Git dependency, we don't know that it's private or that it's not private, so we redact it, and then it looks like your dependencies aren't met, and then it throws an error. Like, there's just like a bunch of unforeseen, unfortunate side effects of the way that we decided to implement it a couple of years ago. And so I want to get this into NPM v7, like if not 7.0, then 7.1, or like as quickly as possible. I don't, and what that means, unfortunately, is we throw away Nirob's implementation. But again, I mean, you
could keep
the implementation is kind of not the hard part.
Concept, yeah. Okay. So you've already given feedback there, Isaac. Appreciate that. Going forward, I think that this is something that we could probably solve pretty quickly for, right?
And the 6.7 thing Isaac's talking about, right? Like, I think this is always a problem whenever any project does a massive rewrite. Like, there's a chunk of time where for valid reasons, they don't want to invest in the current major version because they're about to release the new major version. And it kind of sucks for everyone involved because the users can't get the feature and they have to wait to get the feature. But if you did it the other way, the maintainers, it sucks for the maintainers because then they have to do it twice and debug it and maintain it twice. And so it's like, this is just kind of the way it goes, unfortunately.
If we don't make people wait for the audit overrides, we're making them wait for everything else that's
right.
In V7.
No, and I mean, I'm not trying to cast shade on either decision. Just saying, like, this is just one of those unfortunate things that happens whenever a major rewrite happens.
Cool. So just quickly with the very last item that I actually added here, just before we started the call, I asked during the Cloud Summit, we've opened up sort of a new team, which I'm not sure if we're going to be able to use completely just yet. Have to get some sign off internally, but I'm hoping that we can start to privilege some folks to be able to help us, especially with this call specifically, maybe identify items, add the agenda label to them, or be helping us triage issues. And if there's any interest in yourself, Jordan, or Tierney, in being added to that group, would love to know if we can.
Yeah, I basically do that anyway. More than happy to.
basically in a more like official capacity would be nice, I think. And I think a couple folks have reached out as well that were at the club summit. So with that in mind, I'll definitely be poking y'all. Tierney, I know we have calls separately, and but yeah, this idea is essentially to expand and broaden sort of the scope of the team that's working on this project, and making sure that we're talking about the right things, and that nothing's getting missed in these calls, or getting missed in terms of issues and PRs that are being submitted to us. So
Sounds good.
yeah,
Happy to
I'd love
contribute.
to add you in an official capacity. So this is something I've also brought up with Ed, so who's on the call right now, and we'll figure out how to make it a reality. So cool. So we're essentially at time. I appreciate everybody jumping on today, and again, we'll be circling back and trying to get into a regular cadence here weekly on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern for now. Ideally, we'll be looking at alternating calls times in the future, and also trying to be better at doing async feedback on RFCs going forward. So if I don't see you next week, ideally I see you in the RFCs themselves, and I will talk to you all in a bit. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone.